Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the CMMG Banshee. Quite a few requests to do a review on this, and I've been working my way through PCCs anyway, so I figured it was time. I picked up the CMMG Banshee pistol, the 300 model, which, as far as I can tell, just denotes barrel length. This has the shorter barrel of the other ones offered, and it does have Banshee's radial delayed blowback operating system, which we will talk about. Generally, I've become a little bit indifferent to AR pattern PCCs because they all are pretty much similar. I won't say the same because there are definitely some quality variances there, just like there are in ARs from brand to brand to brand to brand to brand. But what makes this one stand out is the radial delayed blowback system. I will be honest. I had to put a lot of my bias aside when it comes to CMMG. Many years ago, I did own one of their ARs, and it was really high quality. I liked it. And then I started seeing a few of their ARs pop up in classes from time to time, more recently, still a while ago, but more recently, and the quality seemed to have suffered. That being said, this isn't an AR. It's a 9mm PCC with a radial delayed blowback system, so I thought of it as such as far as mentally goes, getting ready for it, so I could remain as objective as possible for my 2,000 round review process. Getting right into the features of the Banshee, it's this particular one is chambered 9mm, although it is available in other calibers, with a 5-inch barrel. Muzzle thread is threaded for 1.5 by 28, which is pretty common for 9mm. The receivers are forged aluminum, 7075 T6. It has CMMG's M-LOK rail. Charging handle is CMMG. They quote it as being oversized ambi, which I would agree with a Magpul Mo grip. And it uses their single stage, what they call a mil-spec style trigger, which we're going to talk about. And it has ambi safety selectors, and it feeds off Glock magazines. Now, it operates off the radial delayed blowback system, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to check it out, because that does separate it from a lot of the PCCs. In fact, most of the PCCs out there in the AR platform style, and the fact that those are usually direct blowback. And direct blowback can be problematic for calibers above 9mm, which, as I was reading into it, was one of the reasons CMMG started sourcing or looking or researching into an operating system to get them away from direct blowback. You'll know from direct blowback, if you've shot a direct blowback PCC, that the recoil can be a little bit more jarring. It's definitely a filling check in certain calibers, especially suppressed with certain suppressors. The radial system allows for a delayed blowback, radial delayed blowback, unquote. And you can look up how that works, but it basically deals with the camming system of the bolt and how it unlocks and how the gas behaves in the gun compared to a direct blowback. Direct blowback has a number of issues in PCC, main one being the caliber. CMMG wanted to offer PCC in calibers besides 9mm, and what they found is in the different pressure calibers, such as 45 ACP or 10mm, direct blowback just wasn't cutting it. So the radial delayed blowback system is what you get. There is a lot of parts commonality, of course, because it is an AR platform. There's a lot of cool things that you can do to this that you couldn't necessarily do to a proprietary system in a PCC. So I wouldn't say 100% parts commonality, because there are some different features, especially one of my favorite features, the ridiculously oversized magazine release. You're not going to be able to throw just any AR magazine release on here. And the magazine release is not ambidextrous. That might be, a sticking point for some people, but just based on the profile and how it has to interact with a pistol mag versus a rifle magazine, and I'm sure there's some geometry issues in there as well. That's just what you're going to get, what you're going to be stuck with until they come up with a way, or if they're even interested in coming up with a way and doing an ambi system. But you do have an ambi selector if that's something you want. And of course your bolt hold and your bolt closure is your traditional venerable ping pong paddle. As far as what I use for the review process, I just set it up with a Trijicon MRO and a ScalarWorks mount, and then a mod light with a Surefire pressure pad and some MBUS Pro backup sights. I used their pistol brace, which looks a whole lot like an SB, and maybe it's a licensed copy or whatever. The big problem with these shorter guns is real estate. So there wouldn't be a whole lot I could do with this. In fact, by putting a QD on the left side of the gun, I lost all of my M-LOK on that side. By putting a flashlight on the right side of the gun, I lost all of my M-LOK on that side. And there wasn't really any reason to put a forward grip underneath, mainly because you get into some legal issues with a pistol, and I didn't know if I was going to end up keeping this thing, so I didn't SBR it. So I reviewed it as a pistol. So for those of you watching who like to pretend to be ATF agents, I do not once shoulder this thing during the review process because there's such a thing called electron expulsion where no two objects actually ever touch each other. So it is physically impossible for me to shoulder this. Also, I don't hold it against my shoulder. I hold it against my high pectoral area. So first things first, 500 round burn down. 500 rounds through the firearm as quickly as possible. I do this in almost every review that I do to see if that accelerated life fire, or I should say that accelerated cycle of fire, is going to cause issues you would not otherwise notice with the firearm. So 500 rounds as quickly as possible. Usually takes me 3 to 4 minutes to get through that 500 rounds. So without further delay, here's your burn down. What? Finally! Boy, did I have some problems. Had one failure to feed, one stovepipe-ish, double feed-ish type strange situation, and I had continual problems with the trigger failing to reset. I kind of made a point of illustrating that during the burn down process. I did get through the 500 rounds. It just took me longer than it should have because I had constant problems with the trigger. We're talking at least a dozen issues where the trigger would not reset, and I was actually resetting it manually and then continuing the fire. And that didn't happen until the gun started to get hot. Now you're only going to be able to get this thing so hot because it is 9mm. It doesn't have the same pressure. You're not generating the same energy, I should say, into the receiver that you're going to get with like a 223 or 556. And anybody who's shot the two at the same volume of fire knows that these things just don't get as hot. That did give me pause, and that's definitely something, if I was going to keep this thing, I'd be changing that trigger out. The trigger itself isn't terrible. It's got a reasonable pull. It is a little gritty, a little grainy, but it's not terrible for what this thing is. However, a trigger that continually fails to reset gives me pause. Another issue I noticed, but one that did kind of work itself out, is the magazines would drop free, and then they wouldn't drop free, and then they drop free, and then they wouldn't drop free. So I had kind of a bipolar magwell going on. I don't really care for that, although I do understand that sometimes things need to break in. So I wouldn't call that such a big deal because, like I said, once I got into like right on 1,000, maybe 1,500 rounds, that pretty much stopped happening except for every now and then. It definitely wasn't the same problem it was right there at the beginning in the first 1,000 rounds. Once the 500 round burn down was done, I just worked the CMMG into my normal shooting. One thing I definitely want to talk about is the recoil pulse. Before we even get into shooting it suppressed, shooting it unsuppressed, the recoil pulse is noticeably different than what you're going to get from a direct blowback. And I have a PCC in the exact same barrel length in direct blowback, and there is a remarkable difference in recoil between the two. Now I'm measuring that based on reticle behavior during shot. So I'm holding on a target at X distance, I pull the trigger on this, I'm holding the target at X distance, I pull the trigger on that direct blowback PCC in the same barrel length, granted not the same brand or anything, but so the comparison is not exact. But I'm definitely noticing less muzzle rise by reticle on the CMMG Banshee, which I definitely think is something that has to be appreciated because the recoil on a direct blowback firearm, period, can be a little bit more problematic. And some people, when they get into 9mm PCCs, they're expecting they think intuitively like, oh, 9mm handguns don't have much recoil at all, so when I put it in a rifle, it's going to have less recoil than my 223 5.56, and that's generally not the case. It's a different type of recoil. It's not the same rearward push, but muzzle rise is a thing. Now, because there's so many 1/2 by 28 muzzle devices out there, one of the things that I would probably put on this would be the dead air brake that they make for the chemo system. You can tame the muzzle even further if you want to, and that's something that you had to do if you really wanted to flatten out a traditional direct blowback. On the CMMG Banshee, you don't have to put it on there. I didn't feel like it was necessary. Now, the next question, of course, is how is it going to behave when we suppress it? Because I generally like to do all of my shooting suppressed when possible. In fact, the only time I usually don't shoot suppressed is when I do reviews on firearms. I ran 2 different suppressors on the Banshee during the review process. I ran an Omega 9K from Soundsco, and I ran the Dead Air Wolfman, which do tend to behave a little bit differently just based on can volume, length, and other internal differences between the 2 suppressors. And the Banshee ran fine, functionally. I was still having the occasional trigger issue when the gun would start to get hot, but the recoil pulse remained as flat as I would like it, being realistic, using the Omega 9K or the Dead Air Wolfman. So with both suppressors, I had no problems with functionality. I didn't have any issues. I didn't have any malfunctions. So as far as suppressing this thing goes, at least in this barrel length, in this particular configuration, this model, definitely a big thumbs up. Ammunition, I shot 115, 124, 147 subsonic, 124 plus P. So I mixed it up quite a bit throughout the review process, as I always like to do. The final word, of course, is accuracy. That's something that we have to be concerned with because firearms should be at least reasonably accurate for what we're getting. So the zero distance that I used for the CMMG Banshee was 25 yards. I figured that was a respectable zero distance based on the barrel length for this particular firearm. So here is a 5-round group fired with a 124 grain gold dot after I got it zeroed. Just being realistic with the barrel length, that's good grouping. You consider that there are handguns that have the same length barrel, which begs the question, why bother with this barrel length in a PCC? Now, I'm not specifically talking about barrel lengths in general, but some people want a super compact PCC. If you were to put a law folder on this thing, it would make it very compact and a little bit more usable than some of those other gimmicky type products that you have out there where you got to like screw and take things off and put things in small bags and stuff things into other things and basically create a nesting doll of a gun, and then you got to put everything together. So if you wanted to make this thing even more compact, a Law tactical folder would be an excellent choice. As far as barrel length goes, I generally don't like PCCs that are this short, but I wanted to, you know, reach out and see if maybe my mind could be changed. My final verdict on this is I'm kind of like, it has some rough edges, and those rough edges have to be worked on. The trigger would have to go. The rail is what it is. You're not going to get anything better. The accuracy is there. Performance is there. There's nothing to me super exciting about it, but that's very subjective, except for the fact that it does have noticeably less recoil than I'm getting from other PCCs that operate on in AR style anyway, that operate off of direct blowback. So there's a noticeable, remarkable difference in recoil pulse. That's going to be appealing to someone who's going to spend a lot of time shooting a PCC and is going to have it for more than just a hobby gun. In that case, this is something I actually would recommend. My mind can be changed. Now, as far as CMMG's quality overall, I can't speak to that because I haven't encountered or personally owned one of their ARs in quite some time, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about just this particular firearm. Now, this is a sample size of 1. And the trigger issues and the initial feeding issues did give me pause because I don't feel like that's something I should have to deal with. And the trigger issue never actually went away. But again, sample size of 1, it's not that big of a deal to throw in another mil-spec trigger. Or if you're feeling fancy, put in an even nicer cassette style trigger or a Geisley or something like that. So if you were curious about the Banshee, it's a good gun. It just has some rough edges that have to be worked on, and hopefully when you pick one up, or if you pick one up, you don't have the same kind of issues that I did. But feeding off Glock magazines, the radial delayed blowback, and then all the features that are going to be available for it. I will say this, you're going to have to SBR it because that length of pull is ridiculously short. because there's that whole legality issue of total length. The pistol braces just don't come back for length of pull nearly as far. And I'm a pretty average sized guy as far as arm reach goes, so I always felt like I was kind of crunched up on it, and I didn't really care for that. So for me, I'm gonna go ahead, probably if I keep it, I'm gonna go ahead and SBR it. And I don't see any reason why I would get rid of it. I don't hate it. I think it's good at what it does, and I think it has the best recoil of any AR pattern PCC I've fired. So if you're curious about how I feel about the CMMG, yeah, okay, it's good. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.